The C word.
Oh, yes.
Culture.
Culture is the feeling people have when they walk through the door.
A strong culture feels stable right up until the moment it isn't. Person leaves, a new leader arrives, hour shift, KPI push, and then suddenly the whole place just feels different.
When I think of culture and I think of how do we enable people, it's a lot about being really clear on what we need people to do, what are our expectations, but not how to do it. How to do it has to really sit in the hands of the leaders.
Guys, the C word.
Oh, yes.
Culture. I don't know what you're thinking. Culture is one of those words that every company uses, but like a lot of things we talk about, very few can actually define. We talk about it, when I hear other people talk about it, it's like it's something intentional. It's something we made, something we're proud of, something within our control, right? Like, here's our list of values and this equals our culture. But in reality, and maybe in retail especially, culture is something much more fragile and much more operational. So how people treat each other, how decisions get made, what gets protected and what gets tolerated, maybe quietly. A strong culture feels stable right up until the moment it isn't. A person leaves, a new leader arrives, hour shift, KPI push, and then suddenly the whole place just feels different. So, and it's not because anyone changed the values, but because the conditions that upheld them changed. So today, we're talking about the fragility of culture, what it actually is, what breaks it, and how to protect it. Matt's obviously bringing the store lens, where these shifts show up, sometimes very instantly. And today we have Marie Casteller of Kind North Consulting joining us with the corporate side insights from 20 years of retail experience, working in brands like IKEA and Lululemon, places that we know talk a lot about culture. And we'll get to learn how and where she's seen how culture gets tested at real flexion points. So the goal is to show that culture is built, reinforced, protected, or eroded through hundreds of small operational moments, and that leaders have far more influence over those moments than they think. No big deal.
Super easy.
There's a reason why this has been such an ambiguous, amorphous topic for such a long time. As usual, I would love to start off with a question. Simple question. What does culture mean? Nat?
So for me, I think the best way to describe it at a store level is really just culture is the feeling people have when they walk through the door. Like, what do they know they're walking into? And so if I'm an employee and I am having a bad day outside of work and I walk through the gate, the door, the threshold, whatever, and I'm like, ooh, it's going to be a good day because you know what? At least I have this. Culture is good. If obviously the inverse, I'm having a great personal day, then I do the same thing. And I'm like, well, and now all of my dreams are going to be destroyed. That's, obviously a bad culture. But I think it really is as simple and as complex as culture is what feelings come about when someone crosses the threshold. And then obviously the rest of the podcast is, how do we make that good? Which is very simple, very simple.
Love it. Marie, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think there is something about just how you feel. And I think culture in retail too is so interesting because it's how employees feel when they walk through the door, but also it's the only kind of industry where it's also how customers feel. Like, customers can feel culture too when you're coming in. So how people are talking to one another, how they're interacting, how they're problem solving with each other. All of that, I think, is part of culture. And Becky, you said it when you were talking about culture right at the beginning. It's the how. And it's actually, I think, less about something that's defined and more about, how our values show up, how our purpose shows up, and then how we act every day, either aligned or misaligned with that.
My favorite way to think about culture is as a lagging indicator of other things. So if we're to talk about the building blocks of culture, what are we talking about? Is it big stuff like employee experience? Is it leadership? Is it purpose or why? Is it all those things?
I don't know that we actually put in strong enough emphasis on this in this podcast up to date necessarily, but I do think for culture specifically, it actually doesn't matter what the purpose or the mission is. It doesn't matter what anything is if you don't have a good leader in a building. Because I would argue a good leader helps enforce those mission, purpose, etc., and build good culture. A great leader, a really great leader, can actually help compensate for no values or no mission and just create their own and build good culture in their four walls. So I think without the culture, without the leader, the rest of it doesn't really matter. So that's like sort of it's not the only thing that matters, but it's the first thing that matters.
And I think the research supports that, right? Like there's tons of research by multiple different companies that say that the manager accounts for at least 70% of the employee experience.
Just thinking about what you both said too, like Matt, I'm with you like 1,000% on the leader. I think the leader makes or breaks what is the culture is in that store or that unit. And should it be? Like I think that's maybe where I would think for brands who want to create a great culture, there is this kind of idea of how do you support a new leader who maybe hasn't led before, help them to develop and still create a great culture. And that's where I do think some of the guidelines, if we talk about values or values-based recruitment, like if your default is to show up in a way that is similar to the values of our company and we've brought you in because we can see you're really aligned, you'll be able to actually grow as a leader and create better culture over time. And you can bring in a great leader who has a totally different set of values. And actually it's going to create some friction between kind of how that store needs to run, or when they leave, how that new leader is able to lead or not lead because of, now the employees' kind of thoughts on what is the culture here. So I think it's, it is a little bit of a dance between all of those things, but having that right person will make or break it at the end of the day.
You really just made me think about something in regards to really whether a leader should have that much power to shift the culture.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually thinking of when I worked at Old Navy, I would say that at that point in Old Navy's life, it was very people forward. And it's why I loved working there. It's why on this podcast, I've brought it up 1,000 times. And I'm thinking actually there was a store about 15 minutes away from me that kind of had a lot of problems. Like no one had really quite like fixed it and like figured out what would make it work. And so they hired this leader, and he was not a cultural fit. And I think in other companies, if he had just fixed the store, even if it was through the way he wanted to, which was through kind of terror, that he probably would have been rewarded, right? Because he would have gotten the KPIs, the store would be cleaned, because that store was literally like clothes on the floor. Like we're talking, it's one of the worst things I've seen in my career, that store. And it was like the joke of like, oh, yikes, who's going to get that? And so I remember one point I was doing really well. I had sort of overcome my own challenges in like taking over this big box store. And my DM reached out to me and was like, listen, I'm going to ask him to call you to kind of get advice on how you got through your own period of like struggle. Because I did the first 7 months at Old Navy, I was like, there were moments of literally me crying in the back room, being like, I don't think I can do this. And so, because, you know, I love a good backroom cry. And so he called me and he started the phone conversation basically being like, I don't know why, like, she's asking me to call you because I've been in retail for, I don't know, X amount of years. I was definitely like a decade younger than him. And I think that like really bothered him. And so anyway, I'm thinking about all of this because Old Navy actually caught someone who didn't fit the culture at the store leader level and was actively like, this isn't working.
What's coming to mind to me is leader versus manager. And I used to think really differently about this discussion. I used to be quite honest, think of a manager as like an undeveloped leader, right? Like someone who is like a bean counter type of person. I think really differently now. I think that they are two very different roles with very different skill sets, right? I do think that a leader is about vision and inspiration and guiding, and a manager is like, yeah, I'm really good at getting the things done to get us there. A store manager has to be both.
Mm.
And I guess what I'm getting at is do you feel like in your experience corporate has supported you to I know they demand a lot of you as a manager. Do you think they give you what you need to be a leader and set the tone for culture?
I'm having a hard time answering this because I'm like, how do I answer this without sounding... So I'll tell you, for me, I'm naturally a leader.
Right.
It's like just my instinct. And actually the piece that I need to work on personally is being a better manager. Like, if I have anything to work on as those two, it's being a better manager, not a leader. Mostly because my like modus operandi is actually like, I'm just going to lead so strong that the pieces manage themselves kind of thing, which works 80% of the time. But it doesn't, there's another 20% where it's like, I have to like turn the leader off and be like, okay, this is just something that has to be managed. Which sometimes can be difficult for me because I'm like, but I'm leading. Let's all go there. So I think for me, that question is hard just because that's not something I struggle with. I will say though, that whether companies actually support me being a full-on leader and not just managing is really the piece. Because I think, again, to use Old Navy, they really let me be a leader and they really let me get results the way that I saw fit. And they didn't manage or micromanage how I was managing.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, okay, if this works, go for it. If creating this team of like really sassy, sarcastic people who are kind of crazy and odd works for you, go off. Whereas, you know, there's other companies that kind of are like, well, how are you going to get them to do the thing? And if you try to explain leadership to them, they're like, no, but you have to have the coaching conversation and then the thing and then the documentation. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing all that. I'm leading. And so I think it really depends on whether companies put value to in having leaders. Because I don't think every company wants a leader. I think a lot of companies want a manager and then they say or either lie to themselves about wanting a leader. Because also having a leader means that their corporate ideas may be challenged, and you know, no one wants to be challenged. And so, whereas if they hire just a manager, they don't have to worry about the challenge.
I don't know. Well, no, I like, I don't know if I agree from the point of a really good corporate should want you to challenge and should want to be held accountable. And I think that's where kind of this, if we come back to culture and values, you know, as corporate, are you delivering content and procedures and newness that's aligned to how you've said you're going to act as a company, not just as a unit? And you should get called out on that when you don't. So I agree. I think there is retailers and companies who do just want managers. It is way simpler not to have somebody ask why. Why are we doing this? But the great ones want leaders. Like, they're the ones who want people who, you know, are invested, who care enough about what's being delivered to them to ask the questions on behalf of their team. You're the front line. You're the ones who are living it every day. And I think that if you're wanting to just have managers, that's probably an indicator that your culture is not great, or not what you're maybe saying it is.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, right? Like, if they want managers because that's simpler, it's simpler until you face 90% turnover, like so many retailers do, right? So sure, we want to have an amazing culture. We don't dispute the fact that a manager, a leader accounts for, right, up to 70% of an employee's experience. But there's a gap in wanting that and believing that, and then what's actually happening and what's getting reinforced through decisions on the floor. And to be honest, I don't think it's, again, I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's because they're bad people and they're like, I don't care about the people in the store. I just want managers and don't question me because I'm like all knowing. I think it's just they don't get how all of these little decisions play out in like the minds and hearts of people on the floor. So maybe we can dig into a couple that are common, that are maybe that you've experienced break culture, right? Like, tell me a story, Matt, about a time either like losing a stabilizing person, a bad hire, a new DO, a shift in metrics push. Like, is anything coming to mind?
It's funny because you mentioned all those, and I think all of those have the capability to hurt culture. And it's really, as we're talking about this and thinking about, this is where all the pieces come in, right? Not just the leader, but the mission and the values. This is where, like, you kind of need all of them to pull together, so that one of these can't break culture. And one of the things, again, I'm just going to keep using Old Navy as an example, but I felt empowered at Old Navy to promote internally someone from hourly associate to key holder. And she failed, by the way. Not a good fit, really. Leadership was really difficult for her. She was an executor, so she did great tasks, but she really wanted the chance, and I felt comfortable giving her the chance. And, you know, she really recognized, wow, this is not for me. And, you know, I gave her several options. She did choose to leave the brand. I think she kind of felt weird stepping back down. I gave her the option to transfer, but it was no hard feelings. She came and visited us after several times. But I'm using that story to say, in other companies, I would never have risked it giving her a chance, because promoting promoting someone who's a bad fit in a role in another company would have actually really hurt my store culture, because the team would have been like, we're giving her a promotion. But instead, really everyone in my store understood that, like, everyone here has a chance to do what they want to do, and you have the opportunity to fail. And if you fail, it's okay. Like, that's not a problem for me or for anyone here at Old Navy. And so the team knows that. So there was no like, well, I knew when you promoted her, she was going to fail. There was none of that, because we had this healthy culture where people were allowed to make mistakes and grow and fail and change and adapt and evolve. I've worked in other companies where even wanting to give an associate like more responsibility, not a promotion, you get a lot of that, like, well, if this blows up, you know, it's usually an assistant manager, not to throw them under the bus, but assistant managers are the hardest people to hire. They're the hardest people to lead, and they're the hardest people to get to grow and change, in my opinion. And so it's always an assistant manager pushing back at me and being like, well, if this blows up in our face, like, I'm going to tell you I told you so. And I think that um, that's a big piece of culture, right? Like being able to have someone fail and not have it destroy store morale really speaks to culture. And I think in my store at Old Navy, I was a smaller volume door, but was so passionate about people that like it was kind of my role unofficially to be the pipeline for talent to other stores, like promote out of my store into other stores. And so I constantly had people leaving, but also that meant constantly people coming in, which means keeping a hold of your culture is hard, because people are constantly saying goodbye and then constantly greeting new people. But it took a village to make that work. It took Old Navy's values and culture and also their understanding, right? Like if I get a visit and all of a sudden I've promoted 3 people and now I have 3 new people in roles, my store might slip in some categories or metrics. And like having that understanding helps us keep culture, because that means I'm not like snapping back to being like, okay, guys, we just lost 3 strong people. We've got 3 new people in positions. Like I need everyone to, you know, hustle and kill themselves and sweat because they can't see us slip in anything. There was a little bit more grace. And it also meant though that like building the culture where my team was excited for new people to join, like, oh my God, who did we hire? What are they about? Like,
Yeah.
what do they do out of work? And so I think all of those things can mess up culture. And that's where just, it needs to be more than the leader. Cause I've been in places, the flip side of that, where I am the culture keeper. There is no, like, the company is not providing me with anything to keep the culture. And in those scenarios, I'll tell you exactly what happens. Matt gets burnt out and Matt leaves. Because I have nothing, because trying to keep the culture yourself, when someone leaves or someone new comes in or there's a new KPI push and you're the only one trying to keep it, basically your emotional battery runs out at some point and you're like, well, it's either I leave now or I burn this building down and I don't want to be in jail. So I guess I will just make my exit.
Right. What I'm hearing is safety, right? Like you said empowerment. You were empowered to make that decision, but you did it because you knew that you were safe. And
Mm-hmm.
even if it didn't go well, you wouldn't be reprimanded for it, and your team wouldn't be phased in a really detrimental way. Talk to me, Marie, because I know you specialize in enablement. How does that look on your side when you're wondering, how do we enable store leaders to feel safe, which is what's going to allow them to promote the behaviors that we want, right? Like innovation, communication, a little bit of risk taking, informed risk taking.
Yeah, I think when I think about safety and culture, I also think about trust. And I think this is where, you know, consistency in how we show up for each other, from like corporate to store, and then from everybody to everybody, really is about these like micro moments of consistency. Because as soon as you start to show up differently, and that, just like thinking of your story at Old Navy, you know, there was trust there. There's trust with your leader that, you know, you would make the right decisions for your store and for your people and for your team first and foremost. And that would be good business. If they started to question you, you know, there's always the possibility that you maybe would have felt like, or I feel distance now from that person because they're not showing me that trust. And so I think when I think of culture and I think of how do we enable people, it's a lot about being really clear on what we need people to do, what are our expectations, but not how to do it. How to do it has to really sit in the hands of the leaders. So, you know, we can enable people through learning, let's say, like, here is the training, here is like our sales goals, like attached to this product or this like launch. And here's like everything you need as a leader to be able to do that. And we know you have all these cultural moments in your stores, and employees focus on what their leaders focus on. Like they don't actually care so much about what a corporate leader says to them. They care about what their leader, what their store manager says to them. So how do you make sure that that leader really is truly enabled with everything that they need to make that experience amazing and great? And again, it's all done through the lens of, you know, what's our purpose? What's our values? Is that like actually showing up? Are we using that at a corporate side to be kind of that that check and balance for ourselves? If we're, you know, putting out a 40-page SOP and we say we value simplicity, like, you know, maybe we're not, we need to challenge ourselves a little harder. So, you know, I think it's kind of all these, again, this consistency that I'm showing up in the work I do to be able to deliver that in line with our culture and values, and then allowing leaders to lead through that as well.
It's interesting because now I don't know that I've ever really like thought too much about like how, I mean, I have, but you've unlocked why Old Navy was special, at least at the time that I was there. I keep saying that because I don't know what they're like now, and I don't want to assume that it's still amazing for people. I hope it is, but when we, you know, there was a joke at Old Navy that we had like 1 million reports and we also had 1 million tools. Like that was kind of like an internal like joke. But one of the things about it is that they weren't prescriptive around what tools you had to use to get a result. So it was basically like, we're going to teach you all these things. You're going to have this amazing, like, you know, portal of our website, you know, internal intranet, where you can find guides and tools and videos and whatever, and use what works and ignore what doesn't. And I remember part of the reason I think they made me the store manager, like trainer, was because I was pretty good at showing people all the tools and then kind of explaining to them, like, I use these ones, but this other store manager over here uses these ones, and you have to find what method works for you, and also your team and the culture in your store. And so that's a really good point around letting people figure out the how we're going to get there.
Yeah. I mean, at first, sorry, I was just going to say, at first when I heard about, you know, tools for tools for tools, I was like, oh, what a nightmare. But I guess if it allows you to find what works for you, as long as you can navigate them in a reasonable way, like literally find them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there's merit to that.
Yeah. And I think what I'd add on to it, because you made me think of, you know, you as an experienced leader, that's like a perfect situation. And then I always go to, okay, well, what about like the inexperienced leader? And maybe it is too many tools, but, you know, again, how do you have a regional manager or a district manager or whatever the role is called in your organization who is able to coach people when they're new into a role, who's able to coach people when they're, you know, developed in the role and they need that freedom. So it's also this like leadership muscle at that next level to be able to say, okay, maybe you don't know how to do it because you started here a week ago. And here we're going to partner you up with another store manager, or here I'm going to do it together with you to really support you in your learning and building that trust with your team. So I think there's always going to be this like human element of figuring out, you know, what everybody needs, making sure they all have it and not being so prescriptive that, you know, somebody who doesn't need that can't go on their own and lead the change and still all get the same results at the end because we're that clear on what it is that we're up to and what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
You speak a lot, Matt, to the need for more personalization,
Mm-hmm.
or needing to have the space to be allowed to do that. We can't have wide sweeping policies or ways of doing things that we assume will motivate everyone or improve performance for everyone. Have either of you experienced a sudden culture shift, either a positive or negative? And can we kind of deconstruct what happened?
I I actually, so I have many, but I'll start really quick with a positive one. When I was at Old Navy, they stopped doing bag checks, which was like unexpected. It kind of came out of left field. We didn't even know they were like revisiting that policy. And sort of to Marie's point of earlier, like if you release an SOP that's super long and then say your value is simplicity, there's tension there. And so Old Navy internally recognized trust as a value, but we're checking your bag. They finally realized, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And so, but what's interesting, what's fascinating about that moment, because I think about it often actually for a variety of reasons, I had a lot of peers who hated the change, like a lot of peers. I was probably the first one in my district who was like, this is amazing. And then there were so many peers who were like, but how will we know if they're stealing? And I was like, I have so many thoughts about how you feel about your team, and I just need to keep them to myself right now. But that change was interesting because a lot of hourly employees were like, they didn't even put together, honestly, like the trust piece and the not checking bag. Like they didn't, it's not like in their head they're like, why are they checking our bags? They say they value trust. But once Old Navy admitted it, they were like, wow, they like are really thinking about it. Actually made the team for the first time go, wait, what are all of our values? It was the first time anyone had ever actually asked me what the values are, because then they were like, oh, they actually mean something. Um, and so that was a really interesting moment.
I love it. Marie, do you have one on deck?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think of one because it's interesting when I think of, I love that example because that's so clearly like, this is what we believe in. And so we do it. And I think for me, working in purpose-driven organizations, I think it's always stood out for me more when something's not fitting with the culture. You know, there is kind of a way that people are showing up, whether it's, you know, always like smiling and saying hello to everybody you pass in the hallway, walking through a store. You know, that's one of the first ones that sticks with me, watching like a CEO pick up garbage, walking through a store as they see it and like not missing a beat, not making a big deal about it, but just picking it up and collecting it and throwing out. It's this kind of like feeling. And then it really, you know, shows kind of that we're all in it together. And as soon as somebody's not doing it, it becomes so obvious. You know, when people aren't learning your name, if they're, you know, walking by with like a blank stare, that's when you start to question not the culture necessarily, but kind of what's happening here. Is this like who we're about? Because culture is about all the people at the end of the day. And I think when you see it from leaders, especially, that's when I think you need to get worried or get curious about, you know, what's going on there.
The thread I'm picking up in both of your stories that is very much on a foundation of trust is vulnerability. Counterintuitively, vulnerability, especially from leaders, creates trust. You don't become vulnerable because you trust someone. You start to trust someone because they model vulnerability. So yeah, admitting uncertainty, right? Like those people that kind of leaned into the values because the leaders were modeling imperfection, I think is really powerful. And something probably from my listening, a lot of corporate retail leaders could do to do some self-reflection on, I will say.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting when you say it too, because I think the best leaders that I've had in retail over the years too have been the ones where they create the space and they're never afraid to say, I don't know. They're never afraid to, you know, show some emotion if something's not going right. Because then you don't feel so alone either, right? Or you feel like, okay, like it's not just me who feels like a little uncertain in this situation. And I think that's how both your leader or the people who are working with you, how we all show up in those hard moments together, not with this like, rah, rah, we can do it, but hey, like how can we do it together? Or I'm not sure how we can do it together, but like, we're going to figure it out, is really a good indicator of culture.
Yep.
In the building.
Yeah, less cheerleading, and a little more just open transparency. So if I could start to kind of summarize and wrap up, and please jump in at any point, the themes I'm picking up for teams that have a great culture and the things that need to be protected, right? So culture is a lagging indicator of having safety, right? Psychological safety. Strong cultures have a sense of belonging. People need to feel accepted and included, which will enable them to communicate openly, take risks, and collaborate. And those small signals matter more than big culture launches or values on the wall type things. The next theme we talked about was vulnerability. Vulnerability creates trust, not the other way around. Admitting uncertainty invites buy-in and more collaboration. So open feedback, share challenges, model imperfection. And then the last one that I'm kind of picking up on is purpose. So establish a purpose. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the company purpose, but why are we doing this? What are we all doing here together? Is that clear? It sounds like the great cultures have clarity about what they're doing and why it matters, right? On the macro and more micro level. So essentially, the safety gets people connected, the vulnerability builds trust and cooperation, and then the purpose aligns effort and drives performance. And that creates a reinforcing loop. I think it's the perfect place to leave it. Thank you, as always, Matt. And thank you so much, Marie.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was really fun.
You have to come back sometime.
Anytime.
You're listening to Dear Corporate, Love Stores.